It was supposed to be just another uneventful patrol. Officer Ramirez had walked the same downtown street for over 7 years. He knew every corner, every crack in the sidewalk, every face that passed by. Most of them ignored the homeless woman near the subway entrance. Just another silhouette beneath a blanket of tattered clothes and forgotten time. She never begged, never bothered anyone. She just watched quietly. That morning, however, something shifted. As Ramirez approached the corner, the woman stood up slowly and stepped into his path. She didn't say a word, just held out a trembling hand with a small piece of candy, wrapped in faded red foil. Her eyes locked with his, not desperate, not grateful, but insistent. Something in her gaze stopped him cold. He reached out, took the candy with cautious politeness, and offered a stiff nod. But as his fingers touched the wrapper, he felt something odd. Too much weight. A faint crinkle that didn't sound like sugar. He unwrapped it instinctively, and that's when the world tilted. Inside the wrapper wasn't candy. It was a folded scrap of paper, so small it could have been missed by anyone in a hurry. But what was written inside would bring his heart to a halt and his instincts to full alert. 5 words, scrawled in shaky black ink. She's still alive. Help her. That was it. No name, no location, just a plea wrapped in sugar and silence. Ramirez's training kicked in. Questions flooded his mind. Who was she? What did the woman know? Was this a hoax? But when he looked up, the woman was gone, vanished into the crowd like a ghost. All that remained was the scrap of paper and a gut-deep certainty that this wasn't random. It was intentional, and somewhere out there, someone's life hung in the balance because of a whisper wrapped in a piece of candy. And in that instant, the patrol officer became something more than a guardian of order. He became the key to unraveling a mystery that had been buried under the city's noise for far too long. Officer Ramirez stood in the middle of the sidewalk, fingers still gripping the red candy wrapper, his breath shallow as his eyes scanned the crowd. The homeless woman had disappeared as if swallowed by the pavement itself. People brushed past him, unaware that something urgent, something unseen, had just shifted the air around them. He turned the scrap of paper over again, his mind racing. She's still alive. Help her. It sounded like a cry for a nightmare, or worse, a trap. But there was something about the woman's face. It hadn't been wild or erratic. It was calm, focused. A woman with nothing to gain and everything to lose, risking everything for a message that couldn't be ignored. Ramirez pocketed the note and turned toward the alley where she usually slept, behind the old laundromat. He found nothing but a torn blanket, a broken crate, and a single boot pressed into the mud. No footprints. No sign of her. He called dispatch. Possible witness. Homeless female, late 50s, Caucasian, red scarf, missing from usual location. No immediate threat, but I need CCTV access for surrounding blocks. The dispatcher hesitated. Copy that, officer. Are you requesting a unit? Ramirez paused. Not yet. Just keep this line open. He knew it was risky. If this was a prank or an unstable individual, he'd waste resources. But if it wasn't, he returned to his patrol car and sat behind the wheel, thinking. The message was cryptic, but the urgency in her eyes had been real. She's still alive. Who was she? Missing person? Kidnapped victim? Someone the system had forgotten. He opened the database on the onboard tablet and began typing. Female, missing, presumed dead, last known near downtown precinct. Dozens of cases popped up, but one stood out. A 15-year-old girl, Sofia Alvarez, disappeared nearly 6 months ago. Last seen 2 blocks from where Ramirez had received the candy. Case marked cold, presumed dead, but no body ever found. Ramirez's throat tightened. Was this about her? Ramirez stared at the screen longer than necessary, heart pounding. The report had faded from memory months ago, just another tragic name in a long list of the lost. But now it glared back at him, like an ember rekindled. Sofia Alvarez, straight A student, last seen walking home from tutoring. Surveillance had caught her near the train station, then nothing. Her parents had begged for attention, but as time passed, the city moved on. Ramirez hadn't. He remembered their eyes. He pulled up the last known footage, grainy, barely usable. It showed Sofia crossing the intersection where the homeless woman had first appeared that morning. Ramirez leaned in, squinting. In the corner of the frame, barely noticeable, was another figure, Someone hunched over, seated beside a trash bin. A heavy coat. Red scarf. The same woman. She had been there when Sophia vanished. A chill ran down Ramirez's spine. Could this woman have seen something that day? Could she have known what others missed? And if so, why now? Why wait 6 months to speak up? Unless she hadn't been able to. Unless someone, or something, had stopped her. He grabbed his keys and slammed the door shut behind him, a storm brewing behind his calm expression. He drove street by street, retracing the path from the footage. Every alley, every park bench, every corner. Nothing. Not even a whisper of her presence. But then, at the edge of the underpass, near the old train yard, something caught his eye. A mural, freshly painted, hidden behind ivy and grime. It showed a girl in a red dress, standing beneath a tree. Her eyes wide, her mouth closed, and in her hand a piece of candy. Ramirez approached the wall slowly, heart pounding. This wasn't graffiti. It was a message, a symbol. He pulled out the wrapper again, comparing the red swirls. Identical. It wasn't random. It was a breadcrumb, and he had just found the first piece of a trail no one else had seen, or chosen to follow. The mural was old in style, but fresh in paint. Someone had taken their time. This was no vandal's rush job. Ramirez ran his fingers across the brick, feeling the thick texture where the candy had been painted. He stepped back, scanning the surrounding wall. Just beneath the girl's feet, nearly lost in the shadows of ivy, was a faint white marking. Track 7. Listen. It was so small it could have easily been missed. But once seen, it became impossible to unsee. Track 7. The train yard had long been decommissioned, but the rusted tracks still remained, swallowed by weeds and concrete. Ramirez headed there on foot, keeping one hand on his radio and the other near his belt. Every step toward the old yard felt heavier. The silence thickened. The wind had stilled, and though the sun was still out, it somehow felt dimmer. When he reached Track 7, it was empty. Abandoned carts rusted along the edges, broken pallets scattered across the gravel. But then, beneath one of the cars, he heard something. A low metallic clink, like a chain rattling. He crouched down, trying to stay quiet. Then, a whisper, soft, urgent, carried on breath more than sound. "Help me." It was unmistakably a girl's voice. He dropped to the ground, heart thudding, flashlight out. "Sophia," he called gently. No reply, just another soft rattle. He shone his light beneath the car, and froze. A small, narrow tunnel had been dug beneath the track bed, hidden behind a stack of rotted boards. At its mouth, barely visible, was a candy wrapper. Red, faded, torn, but identical to the one in his pocket. He didn't hesitate. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch. I need backup and a rescue unit at the abandoned train yard. Possible location of a missing person." Immediate response. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. Somewhere beneath his feet, someone was waiting, and someone else had tried to make sure she'd never be found. Backup was still minutes away, but Ramirez couldn't wait. He lay flat and shined his light into the tunnel. The passage was narrow, maybe 2 feet high, carved out roughly like someone had clawed their way through it. The air that escaped was damp and foul. It smelled of mold, rust, and something else, something human. He called out again, softer this time. "Sophia, if you can hear me, I'm here to help." From deep within the tunnel, the faintest sound emerged. Not a word, not a cry, just a sob, muffled, broken, but real. Ramirez lowered himself down, crawling slowly into the darkness. The walls pressed in tight, earth brushing against his uniform, the flashlight beam wobbling. Each inch forward was a gamble. But he couldn't stop now. He couldn't leave her a moment longer in that forgotten silence. 10 feet in, the tunnel opened into a small, caved-in utility crawl space. There, huddled in the corner, was a figure, small, trembling, barely conscious. Her face was pale, her clothes torn, her eyes swollen from weeks, maybe months, without light. But when she saw the badge, when her eyes met his, something flickered. Hope, recognition, and then relief. Ramirez reached out gently. "Sophia," he whispered. She didn't speak. She couldn't, but she nodded, barely. He pressed his radio. "Victim located. Alive. Repeat, alive." Static crackled in his ear, but the words were said. They were real. This girl, this mystery buried under time and concrete, was still breathing, still fighting. And above ground, in the quiet streets of the city, the red-scarved woman stood once more behind a column of shadows, watching from afar. No words, no celebration, just a faint nod to herself. Because her part was done. She had passed the message, and someone had finally listened. The paramedics arrived moments later, their urgency filling the hollow quiet of the yard. Ramirez backed out of the tunnel, his uniform covered in dirt, blood on his sleeves that wasn't his own. He knelt beside the entrance, watching as two rescue workers crawled in with a stretcher. The officers who responded first looked at him with wide eyes, already hearing the whispers over the radio. Missing girl found. Still alive. After all this time. As Sophia was carefully pulled out, a hush fell over the group. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But her eyes clung to Ramirez like he was the only thread left connecting her to the world. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. "We've got you." She blinked slowly, then closed her eyes. But it wasn't surrender. It was the first time in months she could rest. The sergeant on scene approached him, voice low. "Where the hell did you find her?" Ramirez reached into his pocket and handed over the red wrapper. "Someone gave me this. A woman. Homeless. Wearing a red scarf." The sergeant examined it, confused. "That's what started all this." Ramirez nodded. "And she's gone again. Just gone." Later that day, back at the station, Ramirez sat in the briefing room, staring at the surveillance footage from the past 48 hours. Nothing. No sign of the woman. No clue who she was, where she went, or how she had known. Every lead turned to smoke. But one thing wouldn't leave his mind. The message. She's still alive. Help her. It had been delivered with purpose, with precision, and with no expectation of credit. That night, as he walked home, Ramirez passed the alley near the laundromat where the woman had once stayed. He paused, leaned against the wall, and there, etched faintly into the concrete with what looked like charcoal, were 4 words, one down. Keep listening. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Ramirez lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts spinning around the events of the day. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the mural again. The girl with the candy. The message beneath her feet. It was haunting, and yet it felt unfinished. The kind of mystery that doesn't close with one rescue. The kind that opens a door you didn't know existed and dares you to walk through. At dawn, he returned to the mural. The ivy had shifted overnight. Where once there had been silence, now there was something new, an addition to the art. The girl's other hand was now extended, as if offering something. Beneath her outstretched fingers, painted with the same fine detail as before, was a new image, a small, crumpled photograph. Ramirez stepped closer. It was a painted photo, but the features were unmistakable. A woman, mid-30s, dark hair, tear-streaked cheeks, holding a baby. Her eyes looked directly out of the brick wall, as if pleading for someone to see her. And underneath the image, more words. She didn't run away. He staggered back. Another girl, another disappearance. Ramirez checked his phone, digging through archive case files. There it was. Anna Lee, reported missing 2 years ago. The note left behind had said she couldn't handle the pressure of single motherhood. The case had been closed as a likely runaway. But her body was never found. And now, her face, her story, had been painted by the same hands that had led him to Sophia. He stood in the middle of the alley, heart racing. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. Someone out there was using whispers and walls to scream truths no one had wanted to hear. And as Ramirez stared at the newly painted face, one thought echoed louder than the rest. What if the woman in red wasn't just a witness? What if she was part of something much, much bigger? The next morning, Ramirez returned to the precinct early, well before roll call. He sat at his desk, the wrapper and a printed photo of the mural laid out in front of him. His colleagues passed by, nodding, some offering quiet respect. Word had already spread. But Ramirez didn't want to meddle. He wanted answers. And all he had were clues painted on brick and a name carved in mystery. He pulled up Anna Lee's case again, scrolling through the official report. It was thin. No confirmed sightings. No signs of foul play. The letter had been handwritten and signed, found on the kitchen table. It read, "I can't do this. I'm sorry, but something about the phrasing had always bothered him. It lacked specificity. No mention of her child. No mention of anyone by name. It felt planted. Too convenient. Ramirez left the precinct and drove across town to the last known address listed in Anna's file, a small one-bedroom apartment above a shuttered bakery. The building looked forgotten. Paint peeled from the frame. The mail slot was stuffed with old flyers. But what caught his attention was a small patch of faded red paint on the wall near the stairwell. Not graffiti. Not random. The same shade as the candy wrapper. He walked up slowly, knocking on the landlord's door. An older woman answered, hesitant. When he mentioned Anna, her expression tightened. She was sweet, quiet, paid on time. Then she paused. But there was something strange. A week before she vanished, she had a visitor. A woman. Dirty clothes. Scarf. Red. They talked for almost an hour in the stairwell. After that, Anna looked different. Nervous. Guarded. Ramirez's pulse quickened. Did you see her again? The landlord shook her head. No. But 2 days after Anna disappeared, I found this wedge behind the radiator in the hallway. She disappeared into the apartment and returned with a small, crumpled note. It was written in the same shaky hand as the message inside the candy. She didn't leave. He took her. He always takes them. Ramirez sat in his car, gripping the note like it might crumble between his fingers. The message was direct, chilling, and it changed everything. The official story had been wrong. Anna hadn't run. She had been taken. And whoever had done it had made sure no one looked too closely. But someone had looked. The woman in the red scarf. She had seen what others ignored. He returned to the alley with the mural. The painting was untouched since the day before, but now, knowing what he did, the image pulsed with urgency. The girl. The baby. The plea etched beneath. It was more than tribute. It was evidence. A map disguised as art. Ramirez traced his fingers along the base of the wall, brushing aside debris. There, half buried in gravel, was a rusted key. He held it up. Small. Brass. Worn down by time. On the head, etched faintly, were the numbers, 413. He scanned the nearby buildings. No street address matched. But then it clicked. Locker 413. The train station. The abandoned locker system still sat and used beneath the west terminal, untouched for years. If the woman had hidden something, that's where it would be. He moved fast, the afternoon sun casting long shadows as he crossed the cracked floor of the deserted station. Dust floated in the stale air. Rows of forgotten lockers stretched out before him. When he reached number 413, he hesitated for a second. His hand hovered. Then he slid the key into the lock and turned. Inside was a thin metal tin. Old. Locked with a second latch, but no key required. It snapped easily under pressure. He opened it slowly, expecting papers, maybe a photo. But instead, there was something else entirely. A small voice recorder, old-fashioned but intact, and a necklace. Tarnished. Familiar. He'd seen it before. It was Anna's. She had been wearing it in every photo filed with her case. And now, it was here, hidden by someone who had known where to look and who wanted him to hear what she had never been able to say herself. Ramirez turned the recorder over in his hands, heart racing. It was dented, scratched, clearly handled many times, but when he pressed the play button, it clicked to life with a faint whir. Static filled the air at first, then a crackling voice emerged. A woman's voice. Shaky, breathing fast. My name is Anna Lee. If someone finds this, I need you to know, I didn't leave. I was taken. Her words came in bursts, as if she'd recorded them in secret, afraid of being heard. He came at night. Said if I screamed, he'd hurt my baby. Said no one would come looking. That no one cared if a girl like me disappeared. There was a pause. Her breathing sharpened. Then softer, but someone did come. A woman, she warned me. Told me where to hide this. Said if I believed her, someday someone would listen. Ramirez sat frozen, unable to look away from the recorder in his palm. He recognized the tone in Anna's voice. Not desperation. Not fear. Defiance. She had left a trail because she knew someone would erase her. And someone else, a stranger in rags and whispers, had given her the means to fight back, even after she was gone. The rest of the tape was damaged. Static, clicks, silence. But it didn't matter. Ramirez had enough. He placed the necklace into an evidence bag, locked the recorder in his satchel, and headed straight back to the precinct. The silence in the old train station followed him like an echo, like a breath held too long finally being exhaled. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was a cover-up, and someone had painted the truth in plain sight. As he pulled into the precinct lot, Ramirez made a silent vow. He would reopen the case. He would find who took Anna, and he would trace the red thread back to the woman who started it all. Because this wasn't just about justice. It was about breaking a pattern that had gone on for too long, unnoticed, dismissed, and buried beneath polite silence. Inside the precinct, Ramirez briefed his captain in a closed-door meeting. At first, the man was skeptical. Old footage, murals, a voice recorder hidden in a train locker. It all sounded like fragments. But when Ramirez played Anna's message, everything changed. The captain leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Why wasn't any of this found before? He asked. Ramirez didn't hesitate. Because no one was looking in the right places. And because no one listened to her. That afternoon, the case file was reopened. The forensics team took the necklace and recorder for analysis. The mural was photographed and logged. But Ramirez stayed restless. The woman in red, the one who had connected all the dots, remained a phantom. She had never asked for thanks, never left her name. And yet, everything pointed back to her. She was the thread holding the entire web together. He spent the evening reviewing footage again, train station cameras, street cams, even city bus logs. Hours passed, faces blurred. But then, in a clip from 2 years ago, he saw her again. Same red scarf, same distant eyes. She was walking with a limp-down eighth and Marlowe. And next to her, barely noticeable, was a girl. Small, clinging to her hand, wearing a yellow hoodie. Ramirez froze the frame, zoomed in. The timestamp matched the day before Anna disappeared. That wasn't Anna's child. She didn't have a daughter. So who was the girl? And where had she gone? It was like opening one door, only to find 3 more waiting behind it. He printed the still frame and pinned it to his board. The woman, the girl, the mural, the notes, each one a breadcrumb, left in places only a heart desperate to understand could follow. And Ramirez knew then, this wasn't about one girl or even 2. It was about a network, a pattern, and someone out there had made it their mission to drag the truth back into the light, no matter the cost. The photograph on the board seemed to burn itself into Ramirez's thoughts. The woman in the red scarf, again and again, appearing near the edges of tragedies like a ghost, never at the center, but always present. And the girl beside her in that old footage, she was the newest thread. Ramirez ran her image through the missing persons database, but nothing matched. No open case. No family reports. She was invisible, just like the woman who held her hand. That night, unable to rest, he returned to the alley with the mural. He stood in front of it, this time not searching for answers, but listening. The city around him was quiet, softened by midnight, but the wall felt alive, like it was watching him back. Then he noticed something new. Barely visible beneath the painted grass at the girl's feet was a faint shape, a second set of footprints. Smaller, leading away from the tree. He followed the direction with his eyes. Across the alley wall, tucked between shadows, a second mural had begun to take form. It wasn't finished, just an outline in black. A new figure, mid-step, arm outstretched. A child, the yellow hoodie from the photo. Her face hadn't been painted yet. It was blank, unfinished, as if the artist was waiting for someone else to fill it in. Ramirez stepped back, chills rippling down his spine. This wasn't art. It was a message in progress, a living timeline. And whoever was behind it was still working, still watching. He snapped photos of the second mural, then called dispatch, requesting street camera feeds from 8th and Marlowe, past 72 hours. Look for individuals near the southeast wall, anyone loitering for extended periods. Hours later, the footage came in, and at 3:17 a.m. the night before, a figure appeared. Long coat, slender build, moving slowly along the brick. They stopped, looked around, then reached into a bag and pulled out a brush. It was her, still alive, still painting, still fighting a battle the world hadn't yet understood. Ramirez replayed the footage over and over. Each stroke of her brush, each glance over her shoulder, held a quiet urgency, as if time was running out. She worked fast, methodically, and then vanished down a narrow alley, slipping into the dark like smoke. There were no clear shots of her face, but it didn't matter. He knew it was her. The woman in the red scarf wasn't just a witness anymore. She was a messenger on a mission no one else had dared to take up. That morning, he visited every nearby shelter and outreach center, asking for descriptions, photos, anything. Most said the same thing. There's lots of them. They come and go. But one worker, a volunteer at an underground women's center, paused when he showed the photo. She used to sleep near our fire escape. Never took food, only water. She kept drawing on napkins. Weird things. Symbols. Faces. Ramirez leaned in. Do you still have any of them? The volunteer nodded, disappeared into a back room, and returned with a rubber-banded stack of napkins, their surfaces covered in ink and charcoal. Faces. Places. Some barely legible. But one stood out. A crude sketch of a building he recognized immediately. The old Ridgeview Orphanage, abandoned for over a decade. And beneath the image, in tiny letters, she hid the girl here. He raced across town to the decaying structure. It had long since been condemned, its windows shattered, the roof caved in. But the back door had been recently disturbed. Mud tracked inside, faint impressions of feet too small for any adult. Inside, everything was silent. Dust hung thick in the air. But beneath it, a new message was scratched into the wall, carved with something sharp. She was here, but she's not alone. Ramirez's blood ran cold. Someone else was involved. Someone hunting these girls. The woman had been hiding them, but not just from the world. From someone specific. Someone dangerous. And the deeper he looked, the more certain he became. This wasn't just one hero in red saving children. It was a war. And she was trying to win it one whisper at a time. The orphanage groaned with age, every creak, an echo making Ramirez's instincts sharpen. He stepped deeper into the building, past rotted doors and collapsed beams, following the dust-streaked footprints leading down a narrow hall. He was no longer chasing a ghost. He was navigating a battlefield, one where the enemy worked in silence, and the victims disappeared before anyone even noticed they were missing. In the eastern wing, a former classroom had been turned into a makeshift shelter. Tattered blankets, empty water bottles, a plastic flashlight half buried in debris. On the wall, taped with worn-out adhesive, were Polaroids, blurry but unmistakable. Girls, different ages, different faces, some smiling, others wide-eyed with fear. Beneath each photo, one word, saved. And, at the bottom of the wall, another photo, the girl in the yellow hoodie. Beneath hers, missing. Ramirez took a shaky breath. This wasn't the work of a disturbed mind. This was a rescue operation. Underground, hidden, and completely unsupported by any official system. How many girls have been taken? And how many had this mysterious woman saved without anyone even knowing her name? He snapped photos of everything, then radioed in. Ridgeview Orphanage is a potential hideout and evidence site. Do not approach without backup. This is bigger than we thought. As he turned to leave, his light caught something under the desk, another candy wrapper. Red. But this one was burned at the edge, half melted. When he picked it up, he realized it wasn't just a wrapper. It had been folded into an arrow, pointing to a broken filing cabinet. He pried it open, dust flying. Inside, a folder labeled Project Lark. The file contained pages of what looked like surveillance records. Names. Times. Notes like, watched until 3 a.m., and extraction failed. Mother present. It wasn't official police work. It was something else. Something darker. These weren't criminal records. They were targets. And someone, somewhere, had been keeping tabs on vulnerable girls long before they disappeared. Ramirez took the folder back to the precinct under escort, locking it immediately into evidence. He barely slept that night. The images of the photos on the wall, the names in the folder, the symbols painted across the city, they haunted him. But more than anything, the thought of the missing girl in the yellow hoodie gnawed at his core. She was still out there, and whoever was behind Project Lark likely still wanted her. The next morning, the precinct was tense. Word had spread. The captain pulled him into his office. You've uncovered something the department never saw coming, he said grimly. These aren't just missing person cases. Someone's been organizing this, possibly for years. Ramirez nodded. And someone's been stopping them, alone. We need to find her. The woman in red. They launched a quiet search. Not public. No press. Just Ramirez and a few trusted officers running surveillance across known mural sites, shelters, and the Ridgeview perimeter. Days passed. Then, on the fifth night, a report came in. Red scarf spotted behind St. Joseph's Mission. 3:12 a.m. By the time Ramirez arrived, she was gone again. But this time, she'd left something behind. A matchbox tucked into the bricks, with a small piece of paper inside. It read, "Tonight. The old observatory. Follow the paint." Ramirez went alone. No lights. No radio. Just the knowledge that she was inviting him in. Not as a threat, but as a partner. The observatory had been closed since the 90s, sitting like a crown above the city, forgotten. When he arrived, he saw it. Red paint streaked like breadcrumbs across the broken staircase, winding toward the dome. Inside, the air was heavy. Dust and rust clung to the walls. Then he heard it, a whisper just behind him. He turned, and there she was, the woman in the red scarf. Her face was thin, her eyes exhausted, but when she looked at him, there was fire. She didn't run. She just said, "You found the folder." He nodded, stunned. "Then it's time," she whispered. "You need to know who they are. And who's next?" Ramirez's pulse hammered his ears. In front of him stood the one person who had stayed steps ahead of the truth while the rest of the world slept. She didn't shake. She didn't beg. She simply stood still, like someone who had already lived through the storm and returned only to show others where the clouds had gathered. "How long?" he asked. She hesitated, then said quietly, 7 years. "Maybe more. I stopped counting after the third girl." Her name, she told him, was Mara. But even she admitted it might not be the name she was born with. "The system forgot me a long time ago," she said. "I've lived on sidewalks, in drain pipes, under church pews. But the girls, they started finding me. Not with words. With eyes. With silence. I recognized that look, because it was mine once." She turned and walked toward a rusted cabinet behind the telescope. "You know what happens when no one listens?" she asked. "You start screaming in different languages." She opened the cabinet and revealed dozens of notebooks, thin, weather-worn, some covered in duct tape to hold them together. Inside were maps, times, photos, names, code words. "Project Lark," she said, flipping one open. "They operate through front organizations. Supposed adoption agencies. Youth relocation shelters. They target the girls no one checks on. The ones the state forgets. And the ones who fight back, they vanish." Ramirez could barely breathe. It was real. All of it. "And the yellow hoodie?" he asked. Mara nodded slowly. "Her name is June. She was the last one I tried to move. Smart. Quiet. But they found us first." Her voice broke. "I lost her. They took her somewhere I couldn't reach. But she's not gone. I feel it. The way I felt Sophia. The way I knew Anna never ran away. The others. I failed them. I won't fail her." Ramirez stepped forward. "You're not alone anymore." Mara looked at him, unsure whether to believe him. "You say that now. But when the lights turn on, and the city starts asking questions, they'll try to bury this again. Like they always do." She paused, then handed him a photograph. "This is where they keep the others. It's not just a case anymore, officer. It's a raid. And you only get one shot." The photo Mara handed him was grainy, taken from a distance with a cheap camera. It showed a gated property on the edge of town. What looked like an old children's retreat or boarding school, but its windows were boarded, and barbed wire twisted along the fence like vines. Ramirez scanned the sign in the image. Windsong Youth Restoration Center. A name designed to sound safe. So clean it nearly masked the rot. Back at the precinct, Ramirez launched a quiet investigation under the guise of researching potential code violations. Digging through permits and property records, he discovered something chilling. Windsong was registered under a chain of nonprofit groups that redirected funds through shell entities. The same network had ties to 3 other locations, all shuttered after accidental fires. Every one of them had been connected to cases of missing minors. The deeper he dug, the more connections emerged. A former officer discharged without explanation. A social worker whose license had quietly expired after 2 girls under her care vanished. A retired judge who'd signed emergency transfer orders with no trace of due process. Project Lark wasn't a name. It was a veil. And behind it stood powerful people. willing to use the silence of the forgotten as their cover. Ramirez compiled everything into a digital file, every thread, every name, every timestamp, and encrypted it. He sent it to the captain with a message. This is bigger than us. We need task force approval. Quiet, fast, and complete. Then he called Mara. We're moving tonight. Before they disappear again. She didn't ask questions. She just said, I'll be there. As twilight fell over the city, Ramirez stood at the edge of the precinct parking lot, his badge clipped under a plain coat. A van pulled up beside him. 2 trusted officers in plain clothes, eyes hard with purpose. Mara stepped out from the shadows, scarf wound tight, eyes set on the horizon. We go quiet, Ramirez said. No sirens. No hesitation. Mara nodded. And if she's still inside, she whispered, don't call her a victim. Call her survivor. The road to Windsong was long and winding, buried in a stretch of woods where the streetlights grew fewer and the silence more complete. Ramirez sat in the passenger seat, scanning the satellite map one last time. The property sprawled beyond the gates, several small buildings, a main house, a shed marked for storage. But Mara had told him, it's never the main house. They keep the truth where no one thinks to look. As they approached, headlights off, the air turned thick with tension. Ramirez spoke into his earpiece. Alpha team in position. Wait for my go. They parked just shore of the ridge, where the trees swallowed the view of the front gate. Mara crouched beside him, eyes locked on the rusted fencing ahead. There's a basement, she murmured. West side. The vents are high. That's where they bring them in. They moved in silence, staying low. No dogs, no movement. But the place didn't feel empty. It felt coiled, like something was holding its breath. As they approached the west building, Ramirez signaled his team to flank left. Mara led him around a collapsed shed to a dirt path hidden behind overgrown shrubs. Here, she whispered, pointing to a vent large enough for a child but too narrow for an adult. They used to push crates through this. Ramirez peeked through the slats. Darkness. But then movement. A flicker of light. A shadow. Someone was down there. He keyed his mic. Target located. Basement access on west side. Breach in 3. His voice was calm, but inside, he felt like a match pressed to dry leaves. Every second mattered. Every second was a chance too late. With a sharp nod, the team converged. One officer kicked open the side door, while another covered him. Ramirez and Mara slipped inside. The scent hit him first. Mildew, bleach, rust, and something bitter. They moved fast down narrow stairs, guns raised, voices low. And then, in the far corner of the basement, behind a row of stacked crates, they saw her. June, curled in the corner. Awake. Watching. June didn't move. Not out of fear, but disbelief. Her eyes blinked slowly, as if struggling to believe the shapes in front of her were real. Ramirez dropped to his knees beside her, holstering his weapon. June, he said softly, we're here. You're safe now. She didn't speak, but her fingers reached for his sleeve, lightly, as if touching reality for the first time in days. Mara crouched behind him, eyes wet. Told you, she whispered. Told you she was still breathing. The room was quiet but charged. Ramirez scanned the basement. Makeshift cots, locked cabinets, a desk covered in files. It wasn't just a hideout. It was operations. Whoever had been running this had done it with precision. But they had left in a hurry. Documents were scattered, drawers yanked open. Someone had known they were coming. And someone had just barely escaped. Outside, Alpha Team secured the perimeter. A van with blacked-out windows was found behind the main building. Unregistered, wiped clean. Ramirez stepped into the night air. June wrapped in a blanket beside him. He lifted his radio. Subject recovered. Area secure. Send Child Protective Services and Evidence Unit. And get a trace on everything in that basement. Fast. Mara stood beside the van, silent. When Ramirez approached, she looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Not guarded. Not angry. Just tired. They'll come for me now, she said. They always do when I'm seen too clearly. Ramirez shook his head. Not this time. We're going to put a name to this. You don't have to run anymore. She stared at the dark treetops above the compound, then back at June. That's not why I ran, she said. I ran because I didn't believe anyone would care. Until today. For the first time, she allowed herself to sit, not to flee, but to rest. Ramirez looked back at the building one last time, its shadow finally broken by flashing lights in the distance. They had cracked the silence open, and in the middle of it stood a girl who had survived the unimaginable, and a woman who had carried the screams of others long enough for someone else to finally hear them. The morning sun spilled over the trees as officers and forensic teams swept through every inch of the compound. Ramirez watched silently as June was placed in the back of a medical unit. Eyes wide, face hollow, but safe. She clutched the blanket tight, and just before the doors closed, she looked back toward Mara. It wasn't a look of fear. It was gratitude, recognition, as if she knew this woman had carried her pain before she even arrived. Back at the precinct, Ramirez compiled the evidence. The files from the basement, the voice recorder from Anna, the mural photos, and Mara's journals. Each piece by itself told fragments of a nightmare. But together, they painted something much bigger. A network, a pattern, an epidemic hidden beneath bureaucracy and indifference. And now, finally, they had names, timelines, and survivors to prove it. The press caught wind of the recovery within hours. But Ramirez refused the interviews. Instead, he stood quietly in a back room of the precinct, watching as June reunited with the only family she had left, a grandmother who had never given up, even when the system told her to. The hug between them wasn't dramatic. It was sacred, a promise renewed. That afternoon, Mara returned to the alley where the murals began. The wall was still there, still cracked and weathered. But someone had added a new detail, a small, painted figure of a girl in a yellow hoodie, sitting beneath the tree, smiling faintly. No signature, just a simple caption beneath, "She made it." Ramirez stood beside her. "Was that you?" he asked. Mara shook her head. "No, one of the other girls. They're painting now, too." She smiled softly. "It spreads." And as she turned to leave, Ramirez realized something. The red scarf had become more than her armor. It was her banner, a symbol of the invisible war she had been fighting alone, until now. Weeks later, the files from Project Lark led to multiple arrests. Hidden donors, corrupted social workers, forged medical records. One by one, the links in the chain were exposed. It wasn't just about girls who went missing. It was about a system that let them disappear without asking why. And finally, someone had pulled the veil back. June was placed into permanent care with her grandmother. She began therapy, school, and, slowly, found her way back to laughter. She spoke little about what happened, but when asked what saved her, she didn't mention the raid, or Ramirez, or even the shelter. She said, "A woman found me in a dream. She left me a message in a drawing. I followed it." Ramirez returned to patrol, not because the case was over, but because others still waited. On benches, in alleyways, behind shadows. And now he knew how to look, how to listen. Every time he saw a mural, every time he passed someone wrapped in silence, he wondered, what message do they carry? And who is it meant for? And Mara? She never stayed in one place. But her name started appearing where no one expected, tucked into thank you notes at shelters, carved into benches in cities far away. Mara was here. She watched. She left a light on. The network she had built in secrecy had become a movement. The girls were telling their stories. On walls. On paper. On stages. They were no longer whispers. Because a piece of candy had once held a cry for help. A whisper no one was supposed to hear. But someone had. And it changed everything. Some stories begin with a whisper, not a scream. And sometimes it takes a voice on the margins, a stranger overlooked, a face forgotten, to bring the truth to light. What started as a simple gesture from a homeless woman became the unraveling of something far deeper than anyone expected. A red wrapper, a cryptic message, and the courage to follow the quiet clues left behind by someone the world had stopped seeing. But Ramirez saw, and because he did, lives were saved. A cycle was broken, and silence was no longer safe. This journey wasn't about one missing girl. It was about all the names that get buried beneath bureaucracy and fear. It was about the invisible war waged in shadows, where victims are made voiceless and monsters wear clean shirts and false paperwork. And it was about the power of someone who had nothing, but used that nothing to build a lifeline for those who had even less. Mara didn't need a badge or a title. She carried her truth in paint, in pages, in whispers too long ignored. What we witnessed here is the reminder that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in pieces. One mural, one cry for help, one act of faith that someone, anyone, will care enough to follow the thread. And when someone finally does, the truth doesn't just come to the surface, it floods. And those who were hidden, silenced, erased, they begin to be seen again. They become real. So ask yourself, how many red wrappers have you passed by in your own life? How many people have spoken in symbols, in silence, in pain you didn't quite understand? What if the next clue is already in your hands, but you haven't opened it yet? This story isn't just about rescue. It's about recognition and the undeniable truth that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones no one notices until they save the world. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep, leave a comment. Share what it made you feel. Like this video if you believe in the power of listening. And subscribe to this channel to keep these stories alive, because the world needs more people who refuse to look away.